If I'm just being realistic, I fear that we're going to continue going this direction until we do overreach finally, till we do choose to fight a war we should never fight and get hammered as a result. And only then, in the pain of failure, can you make some substantive changes. And then people won't care about the money, the regular people. They'll care about the genuine security.
Hello, everybody. This is Pascal from Neutrality Studies, and today I'm talking to Daniel Davis, who's a senior fellow and military expert at Defense Priorities, a US think tank. Mr. Davis retired from the US Army as a lieutenant colonel after 21 years of active service. He was deployed into combat zones 4 times in his career, beginning with Operation Desert Storm in 1991, and then to Iraq in 2009 and Afghanistan twice in 2005 and 2011. He was awarded the Bronze Star Medal for Valor at the Battle of 73 Easting in 1991 and awarded the Bronze Star Medal in Afghanistan in 2011. He is the author of The 11th Hour in 2020 America. And very importantly, Mr. Davis is also a fellow YouTuber. He started his own channel and he serves as the host of the Daniel Davis Deep Dive, which I can really recommend because Mr. Davis already interviewed some of America's greatest foreign policy thinkers like John Mearsheimer, Chas Freeman, and Colonel Douglas MacGregor. And as a military man himself, who, however, as far as I understand it, is against infinite expansion of the US military around the world, he has some very interesting insights to give, and the discussions between him and his interviewees are always interesting to listen to. So I can recommend you check out his channel as well. We want to discuss foreign policy and, well, also restraint in military affairs. So, Mr. Davis, thank you very much for coming online today.
Hey, thanks for having me here. I really appreciate it.
Uh, I wanted to talk to you because you started your new channel, and I came across it because, as most of us, it was recommended on YouTube, and I saw that you got some brilliant speakers on, and you have wonderful engagements. Yet, what surprised me is that you yourself are a U.S. military man. So, what brought you to the point where you thought I got to start my YouTube channel and we got to talk about this? And in your intro, in your intro to your channel, you're saying that you want to let people see the forest among the trees, right? You want to give
Yeah.
them a higher perspective. What is the higher perspective that you want everybody to see?
Really, it's just a comprehensive picture. I've always been really focused on getting the whole picture, and and looking at the big picture, seeing the component parts, because very often the details do matter a lot. But if you don't look at the bigger picture, sometimes you miss. It sounds trite, but you miss the forest for the trees, and there's a lot of that I see, especially in the United States, in the Western world writ large these days. But I live here in Washington, D.C., and there's a whole lot of that going around where people want to focus on the minutia at the expense of what the bigger picture is, which often is, what does this even matter? Why should we even do something, regardless of whether we can do it? Should we do it? And those questions very often don't get asked. And since I joined Defense Priorities, which was a godsend to me, shortly after I retired from the Army. I retired in 2015, and by April 2016, I started working for Defense Priorities. I was very grateful because at the time they were really the only outfit here in Washington that was, focused on what they say is restraint, but I just call it sane foreign policy, where you don't always lead with the barrel of a gun, and you actually do diplomacy, and you actually, look for win-win scenarios and trying to solve problems at the lowest level, at the lowest cost, that kind of thing. And Defense Priorities was all about that, while at the same time having, advocating a strong national defense. So, because I'm not what do you call it?
Pacifist.
Uh, well, yeah, and I'm not an anti-war kind of guy or whatever. I'm anti-stupid war. I think I'll throw that in there. But so I was really grateful for that. Well, part of why they brought me on board was not just to write, because I've been writing for a couple of decades at that point, but also to go on television and radio and whatever. So starting in 2017 is when I finally broke in with Fox News, and then expanded out from there. And so I was grateful for those opportunities. But the problem with getting on any kind of television here, whether it's the BBC or MSNBC, NBC, et cetera, is you got maybe 45 seconds to say something when they ask you a question. And if you're lucky, you get three 45-second blocks to talk, and then that's it. And then you're off. And you can hardly ever go into any depth on anything and really explain why something's important and what's going on, because sometimes you just can't get it done in 45 seconds. So I finally said, you know what, I'm just going to form my own channel. And because oftentimes, in addition to that problem, you're at the expense of whatever the host happens to want to say, and whatever direction they want to go. And sometimes I'm thinking, okay, well, that's kind of important, but this direction is really important, and I never got that opportunity. So decided to actually form my own channel, and had the guy who used to be for 17 years worked at Fox News behind the screens, and it's a great partnership that we've had, Gary Villapiano, and been very grateful for that.
Yeah, because your videos are so very, very professionally made. You manage to have overlays while you speak to your guests and have them see everything, which is difficult to do. It's not just a little Zoom connection as we are doing, which is the cheapest and easiest way of getting things done. But you actually have very good interactions. And I completely agree with you that in as right now, one of the important things is to have certain other outlets in order to communicate issues of global importance. So you're another one trying to do that from your own angle, and maybe just talk a little bit about this very interesting think tank or outfit, as you call it, because the defense priorities really advertises itself as a think tank who wants the United States not to disengage from world affairs, but
Right.
not to overextend itself. And you were
Right.
somebody who served in the wars that I view as part of just overextension. I mean, Iraq, especially Afghanistan, for 20 years. And it's always the soldiers who do the dying for the politicians who do the grand strategizing. What are your feelings about that without, going too deep into all the
Yeah.
criticism?
Well, I won't say they do grand strategizing so much as just grandstanding.
Mm,
There's actually very little strategizing that goes on. There's not a whole lot of strategy behind most of the stuff we have. It's just about how it plays on television in the next election cycle, quite frankly, because we certainly see a whole lot of that going on right now with our operations in Iraq, in Syria, in the Red Sea now. A lot of people wanting to go into to maybe help Israel out, or maybe help Ukraine out, and all the stuff going on with that, not to mention in the Asia Pacific area with the China Taiwan issues. Lots of people want to be engaged everywhere all the time forever. And, that's a really awful thing. And the thing about defense priorities, which really appealed to me, is that they want to get, into the context of what is going on in the region or wherever the war, and what is the best way to promote American vital national interest at the lowest possible cost. And like 99, I won't say 99 out of 100, but at least 9 out of 10 times, maybe more than that, it's not using military force, because all these things that we've done, especially since 9/11, we've gotten into some horrible habits to where we want to lead with a gun all the time. All we want to do is either threaten, military force, or use military force to solve every problem. And we don't want to talk to anybody that we don't like. We don't want to do diplomacy, because that takes time. And it's often frustrating, and you don't get everything you want. And so some people say, this just don't worry about it. Let's just force people to do what we want. And that may brief well, as they say, as we said in the military a lot. It doesn't work in the real world. And now then we're starting to see around the world, there's getting a lot of people are getting a lot of tired of the way things have been going and the way we've been doing business. It's not working. It's extraordinarily expensive. The end result is not good for America. And as you pointed out a second ago, there's a real cost to our military personnel and as institutions.
There were these three military servicemen, one woman, I believe, killed in Syria a couple of months ago, and that brought the U.S., I believe, to the brink of war with Iran. And I keep thinking to myself, I am Swiss, and we didn't have any Swiss military personnel killed in Syria because there is no Swiss military personnel anywhere outside of Switzerland. So in a sense, there's a balance you can strike between having a military and then also like using it, and you get, of course, then trapped in foreign affairs that some people might want, and we know them. It's the neocons, it's the Blinkens, and so on. They're happy of having like military personnel everywhere, and then there's others who don't want that, and nations then move by the discussion between these forces. What would, in your view, be a sane setup for the the U.S. military forces, like globally?
Yeah, well, I think that we should disengage a majority of our military bases that we have around the world. I mean, there's, depending on who you ask and who does the counting, 800 of them, which is just ridiculous. We don't need anywhere near that many people. But there's, this belief that goes all the way back to the Cold War, where we have our global foreign presence, and that gets influence, and that gets us in a position to where we can leverage this or that. But you know what? Most of that is just fiction. It's just not true. Like, for example, we'll take that situation you talked about there, and the troops that are in U.S. troops in Syria and in Iraq right now serve absolutely no vital function whatsoever. All they are is a strategic vulnerability that gets Americans killed for no value to America, but it does come at a great strategic risk. As you just pointed out, that almost just sucked us into a war. Many people wanted to go after Iran. Lindsey Graham was the most outspoken, and there was a few others that said we need to go to where the head of the snake is. When we need to shoot, oil facilities and take out the Ayatollah and some of these other people. Just nonsense. Thank goodness that the president didn't listen to those people, but he's under a lot of pressure to do those kinds of things. I have been arguing absolutely at least since 2019 on Fox News, and every year since, and all the time in this current uprising here, to get those troops out of there. Because if you're going to put American troops at a risk of their life, then it better be in the absolute required defense of our country. Defense of our country, not to try to get a policy option, not to try to give us military options for some possible future requirement or something like that. A lot of people say that's to help put pressure on Iran and all this kind of stuff. And look, they don't do anything. There's so few of them there. 2,500 in Iraq, around 1,000 or so in Syria. And all they do is just hope that a drone doesn't strike and blow them up, or that a rocket doesn't land on them and kill them. And that's where we're at right now. And what we should do is to withdraw those troops. If you want to get them to, consolidate on other bases, places where they can be protected, where there's good air defense, et cetera, instead of just all these isolated places out in the middle of nowhere. And I've been on one of those bases in Iraq during my time in 2009, this really isolated base. And most of our time was spent in self-defense to make sure that we weren't surprised or so. But you're not doing anything that's counter terrorism mission. Counter ISIS is what the claim is from Washington. It's nonsense. So we need to shut that stuff down, and we defend ourselves with our national security capabilities, with our military, Navy, Air Force, and Marines, and all that, and our counterterrorism capacity at the national and federal level. Those are we can keep ourselves safe from any threats wherever they come in the world. We have the ability to project power if that's necessary, only if it's necessary, but we would save so many billions of dollars, so many lives, and improve our national security if we focus more on the defense of our country and then elevated diplomacy throughout the world in our economic interests, and use that as ways to promote American ideals and values, and win-win solutions so that other people benefit too, because that works to our security. If other people are getting wins, they're much more likely to cooperate with us than when we have the barrel of a gun pointed at their face. And that seems like it should be self-evident, but too many people in power now have been there since the Cold War, and there's a lot of money tied into it. And so far, we hadn't been able to break out of it.
You put it very well, but the problem is that especially neocons like the Lindsey Grahams and so on, their thinking is if Iran wins anything, then that's a loss for us. It's win or lose, right? So either they lose or
zero-sum game,
we
yeah.
win. Zero-sum.
There
And
can't be a
which
win-win. There
international
can only be a
relations
we win and you lose. That's how they want it.
But there's also something that I've been wondering about for a long time, which is that when I watch, and I watch a lot of US news, of course, and in general US TV. In Europe, US TV is everywhere, because that's just where all the where all the culture is coming from, and it's very, very popular. I mean, it's part of US soft power. But something that I get quite a lot is a sense of insecurity in the United States, and about national security. I mean, national security itself is kind of a holy grail in US politics. I mean, everything can be put under it, or subsumed under it, and there seems to be this great fear that something happens to the nation itself, to the strongest nation that this planet has ever seen, right? To geopolitically the best, the luckiest nation on Earth. Uh, uh, Atlantic here, Pacific here, Canada to the north, and Mexico to the south. I mean, it can't get much better, and yet I get a sense that there's
Right?
constant insecurity. Is that so? And can you explain to yourself where this is coming from?
Absolutely. I can explain it. Your observations are correct. By the fundamentals, by looking at the realities on the ground, we should be the most secure country on the face of the planet with our military capacity and our conventional capacity, our ability to project power, our nuclear capacity, our space-based, assets, our maritime fleets, and our ability to do trade all around the world, and of course the geography that you pointed out so well. We, by all stretch, should be the most secure place on earth. But instead, you have every politician from both parties always want to talk about how these guys are out to get us, and if we don't do something here, China's going to come get us, North Korea is going to come get us, or now it's like Russia, because if Russia doesn't get beaten in Iraq, in Ukraine right now, they're coming after us. That's the current popular thing, and so everybody's just all afraid of all this stuff, and no one does the calculations and goes, can Iran come after us? Can North Korea come after us? Can Russia really roll west into the NATO? And when you look at the fundamentals and like how combat power actually works, how logistics works, how to translate power across borders and whatever, they don't have it. Russia doesn't have the capacity to go much more than 180 or so miles beyond where their border ends. I mean, they have made themselves a system that's dependent on rail lines, Russian rail lines, which are not synonymous with European rail lines. So they can't project power in there. If they even had the force capacity, which they don't, it would take a decade or more of concentrated focus to even create the possibility, the theoretical capacity. But of course, nuclear weapons and 32-member alliance neutralizes that. So they wouldn't, even if they spent the 10 years. That doesn't stop people in this country from hyping up that fear because they need money for the Defense Department, right? That's where the Defense Department, defense contractors are some of the biggest lobbyists for Congress, and some of the biggest people that pay money for their reelection campaigns. I mean, it doesn't matter, Republican, Democrat, they could care less as long as the money keeps rolling. And so they keep hyping the fear so that you keep buying more bombs and more missiles and more tanks and more planes, et cetera. Because if you don't have that fear, then people are going, you know what? Why do we need to spend all this money? Right now, we're closing in on $1 trillion on our defense budget, and there are howls from the rafters here in Washington that because we're not going to get a projected big bump in defense spending for the next fiscal year, that the walls are going to come falling down, that our security is going to be put at risk. It's just boggles the mind when you're telling me that nearly $1 trillion you're going to struggle and you can't even do your basic job as a military next year if you don't get a big bump again. Of course, you see it never ends. But that's the reason why. Because if you don't build fear that they're coming to get us, then all of a sudden you can't justify this massive defense spending. And since the guys who make that call are the ones who get elected, and since the defense contractors who reap the benefit of that are the ones who are helping them get elected, there's no end to it. And I don't know how we get there, short of stumbling into a war that should never be fought, and we lose. Then maybe something will happen. But until that happens, I think the way you see it is the way it's going to keep being.
One must say that the United States is absolutely amazing at warfare, because like the United States doesn't lose wars. It doesn't. And I keep emphasizing that because sometimes people say, yeah, but the United States lost the Vietnam War. No, The United States didn't win the Vietnam War. The Vietnam War was lost by South Vietnam, and look where they are today. It's a very different level of, losing, or there's a very big gap between losing and just not winning. So in a sense, like, the United States doesn't have that experience, right, as the of being invaded the way that Russia was invaded, or the way that Germany lost two world wars in very
Right.
different ways for good reasons. Not nothing about that, but there's no moment. The US, the closest to the US to me is kind of the United Kingdom, which also never lost a very big war in the last 400 or 500 years. Do you think that that influences the psyche of what one can do with a military?
Well, it absolutely does. And there's just this mythos that we can't lose a battle. And as I've been arguing and ringing the bells for quite a while now, is that if we get foolish and think that we can never lose, and we choose to fight a war with China over Taiwan, for example, we're going to find out what losing looks like. Because again, when you look at the force compositions and the ability to project power, the ability to sustain wars over a long period of time, we don't have it. And if we get locked in with China, they're almost certainly going to prevail. And even if we didn't outright lose, the cost would be monumental, more than what we have ever suffered. And I'm including World War II in that. Likewise, in Europe right now, our ground forces, we spent so long focusing on things that don't really matter, like counterinsurgency and how to do these little missions like in Iraq and in Syria and Afghanistan, et cetera, that we have lost a lot of our large scale combat operations capacities. They're trying to rebuild that now, but it takes time to do. So we're not as good right now as what you may think, as historically we have been. Not to say that we're a paper tiger, because we still have the missiles and the technology and the satellites and the Air Force, the Navy, et cetera, which have a great deal of power. But it is not as invulnerable as some may think, if we are foolish enough to get into a war we shouldn't have to fight.
And there are certain tactics that even a large military doesn't help with. I mean, we are seeing right now how extremely successful the Houthis are at being a pain to the largest military, the two of the largest militaries on earth, right? Because it's the US and the UK together. So you cannot do everything against with a large military. Um, and at the same time, what you described earlier is this nightmare scenario that already Eisenhower, a military man, general, pointed
Exactly.
out. What happens when you marry the private sector with military production and politics? Do you think that there's a do you see a path forward to untangle this and refocus U.S. foreign policy and military policy on the actual needs of the country?
Well, I mean, that is what organizations like Defense Priority does. That's there's also the Quincy Institute, which is a relatively new organization here in town. They're kind of the same thing like that. Myself and a number of my colleagues, Doug McGregor, you mentioned a second ago, we are emphatic trying to move in that direction. And I can say that I think we're certainly having more influence than we have in the 6 years, nearly 7 years I've been a part of this organization. But it's incremental, and it hasn't really broken into anything yet. So far, people are listening, but the actions are still like this iceberg that has been moving around, for decades, is continuing on. And those people, because they have the money, we have ideas, they have the money, and so far that continues to trump. So I would like to say that over time our ideas can have an influence, but if I'm just being realistic, I fear that we're going to continue going in this direction until we do overreach finally, till we do choose to fight a war we should never fight and get hammered as a result. And only then, in the pain of failure, can you make some substantive changes. And then people won't care about the money, the regular people. They'll care about the genuine security. And of course, the hope is that doesn't come at too high of a cost. And God help us all if it includes any kind of a nuclear exchange, because then it almost won't matter. But that is my concern. But I fear that it's going to take something massive like that to change the dynamics you talked about.
The war in Europe, I mean, the war between Russia and Ukraine, which really is a proxy war between Russia and US and NATO, is already turning into a absolute policy disaster. I mean, only the blindest of the blind still pretend that things are going more or less okay for Ukraine. But it's still, this is a war that is easy to portray as, it's not that bad. It's actually a European thing, right? So it's not, I mean, the neocons are already spinning it towards we already won because Putin didn't get something that he didn't want from the beginning. Like he didn't get
Yeah.
Ukraine, which, but so you can see how the spin is already working. So this one is definitely not the kind of military policy failure that you were talking about, right?
No, this is not. This is, if this goes the direction that I project that it is going to go, it's going to end up like Afghanistan. So you had the
Mm.
most powerful nation on the planet militarily, the United States and the NATO alliance, and we got basically beat by Afghanistan. Now, to your point, we didn't physically get defeated. Our military's left of our own accord. We weren't beaten in the field, but we didn't win, and the Taliban is in charge today. That was a big blow to our credibility because people think, man, you did all this stuff 20 years with this big, powerful alliance, and the Taliban is still in power. They outlasted you and won. And so now then you see the same kind of dynamic starting to play out in Ukraine, to where our unwillingness to acknowledge reality and end this long time ago, which we could have done, we actually could have prevented it from ever happening at all. But people wanted Russia to be harmed, so they were cool with going into war. That's a moral issue we can talk about separately if you want. But the problem is that now that the trend's going where they are, Russia will win this war. Ukraine cannot win militarily. So at some point, you're going to come to another decision point, like in Afghanistan, where the Afghan government and military collapsed, where the Ukraine military could collapse because of this sustained pressure that Russia, which is getting stronger by the month, continues until finally there's a break in the situation. And now all of a sudden, it's Russia that wins, just like it was the Taliban that won. NATO forces withdraw back to their lines. And now then you're like, man, y'all just got handed to you twice in a row here. Are you even that good anymore? Now all of a sudden there's a lot of self-doubt within NATO, a lot of finger pointing. It could get bad, but that won't be the one I'm talking about. That'll just be embarrassing again. But I'm talking about, like, especially if Macron does something crazy and French troops get involved and we actually get a fight between NATO and Russia, or if we go and choose a fight with China. That's what I'm talking about. It's just a force on force, peer on peer, conventional fight that help us all if it goes nuclear. But that's where we could get really hammered.
Part of why I do this channel and my entire research is to tell people like you and other realists that look, neutrality and neutralization of plots of land and waterways would be a fantastic way of bringing some space between these goddamn beasts. These great powers are beasts, and a little bit of space helps. Do you see
Yeah.
Do you think that neutrality, like that Ukraine should have been neutralized even against its own will and said, like, no, you're off the table. You're gonna stay where you are. You will not be a part of NATO. If the Russians attack you, then we will help you with weapons, but that's it. And you're gonna stay neutral. Would that be something that you would have supported back then?
I did support that. I was vociferously moving in that direction. I wrote a series of articles. I think I started maybe 7 to 9 months. I can't remember exactly when I started. When it was became started to become evident to me that Russia was really going to actually invade this time, I started writing articles. Said we're heading in a wrong direction. This needs to be a neutrality issue. We need to take NATO off the table right now. And don't even go there. They're never going to join NATO. We don't want them in NATO. They won't pass our own standards. So why even pretend otherwise if that's going to cause a war? So I said we should have declared neutrality before it happened. There was so many options, available to Ukraine to still remain free and independent and have their own foreign policies and everything else, not be invaded. It could have happened even after the war started, and the famous Istanbul conference meeting where they were close to, coming closer to making a negotiated settlement. And then for various reasons, it didn't happen. History will probably tell us what really happened, but we know for sure that what was a shot to end this, which centered on neutrality for Ukraine, was thrown away. And now that Ukraine has grotesquely paid the price for that, no matter what Zelensky wanted or what Boris Johnson allegedly wanted or whatever, or Biden, who knows what. But the for sure bill payers are the Ukrainian people, the Ukrainian territories, and Ukrainian cities. And so I think you're going to end up getting a neutral Ukraine, a rump state, by the time this is finally done in a negotiated settlement. And the tragedy upon tragedy will be that they could have had that same deal, actually a much better deal, in prior to the war, Minsk agreements, the one that Russia floated in December of 2021. Many opportunities were on the table, and we rejected them all. And now Ukraine is paying the price.
I agree with you 100%. One thing that I wonder about is why people who don't share that analysis, people who disagree with us and who say like, no, Putin is a warmonger and he just is a second coming of Hitler. He wants to get all of Europe in
Yep.
order then to go to New York or whatever it is that they're thinking. Why do these people cast this discussion into moral terms? They usually call us immoral for not wanting to help, for not wanting to be like show solidarity with Ukraine. We are being portrayed as selfish. Can you explain this to
Yeah.
yourself about the others?
I can. So on my show, I want to say 2 weeks ago, on the Daniel Davis deep dive, I showed a clip of the former Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, was going on. I think it was CNN, and was talking about how we have to pass this new foreign aid package for $60 billion so that Ukraine can get the weapons that it needs. That's the only thing holding them back is this. And look, we have to because Russia is evil. He's evil. And then she rattled off several things that she claims that he has done or whatever. And he has to be stopped. We have to roll him back. We have to. And of course, Ukraine's going to win, but we have to go down this path there. It's irrational, but it's very emotional. And when you start throwing around those terms like evil and they kill pregnant women and babies and all this other kind of stuff and rape women, all these big emotional issues, then people who don't know or don't spend the time to find out what's really going on, they hear that and they think, oh my gosh, yeah, well, we better shoot. Yeah, we better, get rid of this. And so whether Nancy Pelosi knows or not, I don't know if she's not aware that that $60 billion isn't going to make any difference, or if she maybe thinks it does and believes it. I can't say, but I can say that she's, by making those arguments, they're perversely making the suffering of the Ukrainian people worse.
Very last question. Do military men and women like you, do they think in terms of good and evil? Were you ever in a combat situation or were you ever deployed and you thought I'm fighting evil now? Or what's the thinking for people on
We
the ground?
we do, at least in the U.S. military. I can say that we do think in terms of the right, the moral right. I mean, that's actually part of our Army ethos, is the seven Army values, and to do what's right, even when it's hard, and all that. It's drilled into us from day one, and we like to believe that we're on the side of good. I mean, why would we be on the side of evil? Of course not. We stand against evil, and of course, it always goes back to Hitler. Everything goes back to Hitler, as you pointed out. We stood up for our values then, or the Kaiser in World War I, all that, and so we're always the shining light on the hill. We love to see things in America, especially in black and white terms, good and evil, good guy, bad guy. That's why Putin was a bad guy, Zelensky was a good guy, and that's it. So there's no more debate, no more discussion. Doesn't matter if there's lots of actions on the Zelensky side which are make it go like, whoa, that's not so good, or that some things that Putin does, well, that's not so bad. You can't do that. It's got to be all good and all bad, and that's it. And so we can't do nuance. We can't do gray. And as I've said, there's not a good guy and a bad guy here. There's just this guy and a that guy. I mean, they both have good and both have evil. They're both trying to do something for their country. They both have conflicting ideologies and conflicting beliefs, but nobody's good in this situation. They both have their own perspectives. And if you can't look at it in those terms, then the only thing left is in some kind of emotional moral terms. And well, then all of a sudden you can't analyze individual elements of something. It's just all good or it's all bad. And that's part of our problem.
I agree. Daniel Davis, host of The Deep Dive, thank you very much for your time. And everybody, check out Daniel's awesome show. Thank you, Daniel.
Thank you very much. I appreciate being on your show.